When I was very young, I lost my mom to a sudden heart attack. It was just an ordinary day, or at least, that's what it seemed like at the time. I was in the kitchen with my mother. She was doing something in there, cooking, cleaning, or humming to herself while preparing meals for our family. I can't recall what I was doing at that moment, maybe playing with some toys or chatting with her about something, but I do remember the suddenness of it all. One minute, she was standing there, and the next, she collapsed, crumpling to the floor right in front of me. It was terrifying. I had never seen my mother like that before, so still, so unresponsive. I didn't understand what was happening. I was just a child, and my innocent mind couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what was unfolding. I tried waking her up and sat next to her, confused and scared, but got no response. I remember touching her hand, and her face, hoping she would open her eyes and smile at me, but she didn't. I started to cry, helplessly, hoping, praying she would move. I don't remember when, but eventually my dad came home and found us. He saw her on the floor and me crying beside her, and immediately knew something was wrong. He started screaming her name as he grabbed the phone and called 911, his voice shaky. I don't remember much about the paramedics arriving, just flashes of strangers in uniforms, a lot of movement, and voices that didn't make sense to me. They checked me over, making sure I wasn't hurt. I just wanted my mom to be okay and kept looking over at her. And then, the paramedics broke the unfortunate news to my dad. Mom was pronounced dead right there in our kitchen, and my dad broke down crying. My family was not the same after my mom passed away. The day we had my mom's funeral, my dad seemed utterly broken. I remember standing there, holding my dad's hand, staring at the casket, but everything else seemed distant, like I was watching it all happen from far away. People offered their condolences, but their faces and words barely registered with me. All I could think about was that my mom was gone, and I would never see her again. I didn't know how to process that. I was too young to understand the meaning of death. That night, my dad came back home and held me tightly, both of us sobbing, and I can still recall the way his tears soaked through my hair. He cried himself to sleep, holding me close as if I was the only thing left grounding him to this world. The two of us were lost in our grief, unsure of how to move forward without the person who had been the heart of our family. Thankfully, in the midst of all this pain, my Aunt Sophia stepped in. She was my dad's sister, and from the moment Mom passed, she became our lifeline. I don't think we would have made it through those first few months without her. My dad was utterly lost. He couldn't handle his grief, and for a long time, he didn't try. He retreated into himself, barely speaking to anyone. He would go to work in a daze, come home, and drink until he passed out on the porch or on the couch. It was as though he was just trying to survive each day, numb to everything around him. I needed him, but he wasn't there, not really. I felt abandoned, even though I knew he was hurting too. Aunt Sophia, though she was different. She became sort of a parent figure to me during those days. She made sure I was okay, physically and emotionally. Every morning, Sophia would come over to pick me up, taking me to school, and making sure I had everything I needed. She would pack me lunch, sometimes with little notes tucked inside. After school, she would be there to help me with my homework, sitting patiently with me at the table, even when I struggled to focus. It's not like I could think straight with everything going on, but she never pushed me, she just supported me. When I needed to talk, she would listen, and when I didn't, she would just sit with me in silence. Later during the evening, my nanny would take over looking after me until my dad could come back home. Aunt Sophia had her own life, and her own husband, but for those months, she made me and my dad and her priority. She must have been exhausted, running between her life and ours, but she never once let it show. I don't know how she did it, but she became the glue that held us together. My aunt gently encouraged me and my dad to start going to church so we could find some peace and routine in our lives. Around that time, my school also recommended that I go to grief counseling since my grades were declining due to my mental health. Talking to a therapist helped me a lot as it gave me a safe space to express the feelings I didn't know how to handle on my own. I could talk about the confusion, the sadness, and even the anger I felt, without worrying about how it would affect my dad. Grief counseling became a crucial outlet for me, and I started to understand that it was okay to feel everything I was feeling, that there wasn't a right or wrong way to grieve. And in a way, it helped me connect with my dad better, too. Because as I learned how to deal with my emotions, I could also be there for him, even if just in small ways. I have to admit that my dad, for all his struggles, was an incredible father to me in those initial years. As he began to emerge from his grief, we started spending more time together. I've heard stories from friends about how strict their fathers were, some even talking about being yelled at or hit, but my dad was different. He never raised his hand to me, never even really raised his voice. He was patient, and gentle, and always tried to understand me, even when I wasn't being very understanding myself. I know I wasn't the easiest teenager to raise. I was dealing with the usual struggles of adolescence, plus the added weight of my mother's death. There were times when I was moody, distant, and sometimes even rebellious, but my dad handled it all with so much grace. He just did his best to be the best father he could. When my dad initially started dating again, nothing really came of it. Women would come and go, but nothing ever got serious enough. That all changed eventually when he met Dee Dee. He was head over heels for her since their first date. He would always come back home smiling after their dates, and I felt happy for my dad. I wanted him to find his own happiness, and if Dee Dee was the answer, then so be it. The first time my dad brought her home, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I tried to keep an open mind for his sake. From the moment Dee Dee walked through our front door, she was nothing like Dad described her, and I had a bad feeling. She didn't seem welcoming or kind. In fact, she came across as snarky and judgmental from the very start. I'll never forget the way her eyes roamed our house, scrutinizing everything like she was searching for flaws. And when her gaze landed on the photos of my mom that were still proudly displayed in our living room, her eyes narrowed and she looked pissed. During lunch, she told my dad, right in front of me, that having pictures of my mom around the house was disrespectful to her, and that if he was serious about their relationship, he needed to get rid of them ASAP. I was shocked furious, even that someone who barely knew us could make such a demand. Those were family pictures, and it had nothing to do with Dee Dee whatsoever. However, what hurt even more was when my dad went along with it. Without even asking me how I felt, he packed up all the portraits, every single one, and locked them away in the attic. Just like that, the images of my mother were hidden away, like they were something to be ashamed of. As their relationship progressed, Dee Dee started coming over more often to our place, and with her came her 2 young kids. They were always loud, wild, and had no sense of boundaries. They would break things constantly, running wild through the house as if there were no rules. They'd knock over furniture, spill food, and leave messes everywhere. And worst of all, they had no sense of personal space. I would catch them wandering into my room, touching my things without permission, and even trying to take stuff that didn't belong to them. At first, Dee Dee would encourage me to spend time with the kids, saying how this would help us become a family. However, I quickly realized that she just wanted a free babysitter who could keep her kids entertained while she and my dad could go out for their dates. I wasn't stupid, I could see what was happening, and the more it happened, the more resentment I felt towards her and her kids. I tried talking to my dad about how I felt, but he urged me to give Dee Dee and her kids a chance. He wanted me to be more open, to try to embrace them as part of our family, but I just couldn't. So I started to avoid them. Whenever Dee Dee and her kids would come over, I'd retreat to my room and refuse to come out until they left. I didn't want to mix with Dee Dee's family. It didn't take long for Dee Dee to notice, and it became clear she wasn't happy about my distance. One evening, after another visit where I'd barely said a word to her kids, Dee Dee finally snapped. She and my dad got into a huge argument. I could hear her yelling, her voice echoing through the house. She was furious, complaining about how I wasn't talking to her kids and that I wasn't being a good brother to them. She then walked up the stairs and banged on my door, ordering me to open up and telling me how I needed to be taught a lesson. Her audacity was unbelievable, standing in my home, screaming about how I needed to be punished like I was some delinquent child. She had no idea what I had been through, no understanding of the pain and loss my dad and I had experienced. I had never been disrespectful to her or her kids, yet here she was, trying to force me to be some sort of a brother to her kids. The worst part was that my dad didn't say a word in my defense except to ask her to calm down. It was like he was afraid to challenge her, or maybe he just didn't want to. I'll never forget how small and helpless I felt at that moment, realizing for the first time that my dad wasn't going to stand up for me against Dee Dee. Later, after the argument had cooled down and Dee Dee had gone home, my dad came to talk to me. I thought maybe he'd apologize for letting things get so out of hand or try to understand where I was coming from. But instead, he told me that the whole situation was my fault. He explained that Dee Dee was a good woman, and that she and her kids had been abandoned by her ex-husband. They were just looking for a stable family, and I was making things difficult by not accepting them. He said that he was happy with her and that, for his sake, I needed to at least try. I was floored. I couldn't believe that he was putting this on me, that he was expecting me to just ignore how I felt and go along with it because it made him happy. I understood that Dee Dee had been through a tough time, and I didn't blame her kids for any of it. They were just caught in the middle, like me. I certainly didn't appreciate being made to feel like I was the problem just because I didn't fit into this perfect picture of a new family that my dad and Dee Dee were trying to create. So, I argued back. I told him straight out that I had no issue with him dating Dee Dee, and I could even live with her being around if that's what made him happy. But what I couldn't stand was how he and Didi were constantly imposing their decisions on me, as if my feelings didn't matter. I reminded him that I was his son, his family, and that he needed to consider how I felt about all of this also. I told him I wasn't interested in building a deeper relationship with Didi or her kids. I could be polite, I could be civil, but beyond that, I wasn't going to force something that wasn't there. My words didn't sit well with my dad. I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He didn't say much after that, but the very next week, he forced me to attend a family counseling session with him and Didi out of nowhere. My heart sank the moment I realized that I was being dragged into a situation where they both wanted to gang up on me under the guise of working things out. From the moment the session started, it was clear Didi had an agenda. She kept talking about how she just wanted herself and her kids to be accepted, and how I was the one standing in her way. It was like she had this rehearsed script, repeating over and over again how I was the obstacle to this perfect new family they were trying to create. At one point, she even started to cry, telling the therapist how I refused to let her into my life no matter how hard she tried. The tears felt so rehearsed, so convenient, like she was trying to manipulate us into feeling sorry for her. And, predictably, my dad leaned into it, nodding and comforting her. But the therapist remained calm, not swayed by Didi's display. She turned to me and asked me what I wanted. It was the first time since Dad and Didi had started dating that anyone had actually cared about my perspective, and I felt a small sense of relief. I told her the same thing I'd told my dad before. I didn't want a deep relationship with Didi and her kids, but I would always be polite to them. That was as far as I was willing to go, and honestly, I thought that was more than fair given everything that had happened. Of course, Didi didn't like that. She immediately jumped in, saying how her kids deserved to be accepted and loved fully, and how I needed to stop grieving over my mother, who had been dead for years anyway, and move forward in life. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just insensitive, it was cruel. She expected me to just move on, as if my mom's death didn't still affect me every single day, as if her presence in my life hadn't shaped who I was. My dad, sitting beside her, actually agreed with her and told me that I needed to come out of my shell and see how wonderful our life could be with Didi and her kids as part of our family. I couldn't believe it. He had never spoken to me that way about my grief before. It was as though, in his mind, Didi had become more important than preserving the memory of my mom. His desire for this new family had blinded him to how much I was still hurting, and he couldn't or wouldn't see that asking me to accept this new reality wasn't as simple as just moving on. Thankfully, the therapist took my side. It was the first time I felt validated in a long time. She didn't let Didi or my dad bully me. Instead, she pointed out that they were pushing too hard, and that they weren't giving me the space I needed to process everything. She even suggested they try to see things from my perspective, which I appreciated. But, of course, Didi didn't. Her face said it all. She was furious. I could tell that being called out by the therapist wasn't something she had expected, and it didn't sit well with her. On the drive home, her anger boiled over. She started complaining to my dad, calling the therapist an old woman, and accused her of being biased towards me, since I was a kid. It was like she couldn't accept that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't right about everything. She kept going on and on, saying that all of this could be easier if I would just stop being stubborn. I sat in the back seat, quietly listening to her rant, trying to keep my cool. But then she crossed a line. She snapped, saying that my mom would be ashamed of me for not letting my dad be happy in his life, and how I was clearly holding him back. That hit me harder than anything else she had said up until that point. She dared to bring up my mom and was using her memory to guilt me. It wasn't just hurtful, it was cruel beyond words. Up until that moment, I had held back. I had taken her words, her jabs, and her insults because I wanted to keep the peace. But this was different. This was too much. I snapped. I told her that I hated her, and that I wished she and my dad had never met. I continued to tell her that she was evil and that I did not want anything to do with her and her children. The words spilled out of me, raw and full of the anger I had been holding in for so long. I didn't care anymore about keeping things civil or polite. I was done. Then I turned to my dad. I screamed at him for always taking her side, for treating her like she was already his wife when I had been there with him for all those years after Mom passed away. I reminded him that I was family, not Didi. And yet here he was, allowing her to make me feel like I was the outsider in my own family. I told him that Didi had no right to bring up my mom and shame me for how I was feeling. She had no place to speak about my mom, and the fact that my dad hadn't said anything to defend me made me feel utterly betrayed. I admit that my words were harsh. But I was tired of being pushed aside and my feelings ignored. Didi again burst into tears and yelled at my dad, her voice shaking with emotion, saying that she couldn't take it anymore. She gave him an ultimatum, telling him that he needed to choose either me or her. She was done with me, she said, and if he wanted a future with her, then something had to change. My dad looked torn, but he didn't try to reason with her or calm her down. Instead, he just grounded me when I reached home and asked me to go up to my room. After everything that had happened, after all the hurtful things Dee Dee had said, I was the one being punished as usual. The injustice of it all made me want to scream. I tried to argue, tried to explain how out of line Dee Dee had been, but my dad wouldn't hear any of it. He just kept repeating that he was tired of all the fighting and that I needed to start respecting Dee Dee if I wanted peace in the house. Later, I could hear him and Dee Dee continuing to yell at each other, and eventually, she left the house. Not even 3 days later, my dad came to me and said he needed to talk. I thought maybe he was going to apologize for grounding me or try to make peace somehow. But what he said next shattered everything. He told me he had thought long and hard and had decided ultimately that I needed to leave the house. He said that he wanted a future with Dee Dee, and that couldn't happen with all the tension between us. He explained that I would be going to live with my Aunt Sophia and that he'd continue to send child support money until I turned 18, but after that, he was done taking care of me. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father was choosing a woman over me. He was sending me away his own flesh and blood for the sake of his relationship with her. Aunt Sophia came to pick me up later that week. When she arrived, she was fuming. Apparently she had no idea that things were so bad between us until Dad had asked her to let me stay with her permanently. She stormed into the house and immediately started arguing with my dad. They had a full-blown screaming match in the hallway. She laid into him, telling him that by making this decision, he was destroying our relationship forever. She warned him that kicking me out like this would have lasting consequences, not just for me, but for him too. But my dad wouldn't back down. He kept repeating that he deserved to be happy, like that was all that mattered. I stood there, sobbing, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. Aunt Sophia eventually grabbed my bags, gave my dad one last disgusted look, and led me out of the house. I didn't want to leave. As much as I was angry and hurt, I didn't want to believe that this was really happening. But it was. My dad was letting me go. He had chosen Dee Dee and her kids over me, and there was no going back. I cried the entire way to Aunt Sophia's house. It felt like I had lost one more parent all over again. The pain was unbearable, and no matter how much Aunt Sophia tried to comfort me, nothing could take away the feeling of betrayal that was sinking deeper into my chest. I had never felt so alone. These past 7 months have been some of the hardest in my life. I've had to learn how to come to terms with my dad's decision, but the truth is, I'm still grieving. Meanwhile, my dad has wasted no time moving on. According to Aunt Sophia and my cousins, Dee Dee and her kids moved into the house soon after I left. I try not to think about it too much, but it's hard not to imagine Dee Dee's kids running around in the same place where I grew up, where all of my mom's memories once lived. It stings to think about, but I guess my dad got the happy family life he always wanted. Just yesterday, Aunt Sophia received a wedding invitation from my dad and Dee Dee. The shock hit me all over again. We didn't even know they were engaged. I hadn't spoken to my dad in months, and to suddenly hear that they were getting married, after kicking me out of the house, felt like another punch to the gut. Aunt Sophia was furious when she saw the invitation. She immediately called my dad, absolutely livid that he would have the audacity to send it, knowing full well what he had done to me. She told him that he was cruel for trying to rub his happiness in my face after everything he put me through. But my dad argued that he needs me to attend the wedding at least for appearance's sake, so people don't question him about my whereabouts. He had the nerve to say that my presence at the wedding was mandatory so that people wouldn't raise questions about him and his new wife. I am appalled. The fact that he has the audacity to not even apologize yet expects me to save his face in front of family and friends, makes me sick to my stomach. It is like I am not even his son anymore, just a prop to make his new life look picture perfect. Ida, if I don't attend my dad's wedding? Update 1. My aunt and I have been seeing all of your positive comments coming in. Some of you have been so incredibly kind to me and even reached out to me in the DMs to ask if I need any financial help. To clarify, my dad has been paying for my school expenses these past months, otherwise he knows my aunt would not hesitate to drag him to court. However, if I have any further expenditures, then my aunt covers them for me. I am genuinely grateful to have someone like her on my side, otherwise I don't know where I would have ended up. My dad has never reached out to me all these months to even apologize or check up on me. For everyone asking if he is being manipulated or controlled in his relationship by Dee Dee, I honestly don't know. I have no idea about the inner workings of their relationship. However, I do believe that he is an adult and can make his own decisions. He could have easily chosen me over her by not asking me to move out, but he clearly chose her. Update 2. It's been 1.5 months since I updated anything here. Me and Aunt Sophia went through all the comments and we agreed that the best course of action was to go ahead and attend the wedding. I wanted everybody to know the real face of my dad and his bride. Long story short, we attended the wedding and remained only civil towards them. My dad didn't come up to hug me or say a word. He kept his distance, looking awkward and almost uncomfortable whenever our eyes met. It was like he didn't know how to face me anymore, as though seeing me reminded him of the choices he made. When the speeches started, I figured I'd be able to sit in the background and just get through it quietly. But then, the guests started encouraging me to say something since I was his child. Dad and Dee Dee looked nervous, probably hoping I'd just say something quick and nice for the sake of appearances. I stood up and took the mic, congratulating the happy couple with a sarcastic smile. I wasted no time telling the truth and pointed out how wonderful it must be for them to start a new life after kicking me out of the family home. I noticed Dad's face tense up, but I continued sarcastically, announcing just how much Dad must love Dee Dee since he was willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood for her happiness, and we should definitely applaud them for that. The room went silent, and I could feel the eyes of every guest turning towards Dad and Dee Dee. They looked absolutely petrified, frozen in their seats as the weight of what I'd said sank in. My aunt also stood up and revealed to everyone that I had been living with her for the past few months, and apparently, Dad wanted to keep this a secret because he didn't want people to know what a terrible person he is. She looked right at him, her voice filled with disgust, and said she was ashamed of her brother and had only come to the wedding with me to expose him and his vile bride. After that, people started asking my dad if this was all true, and the family seemed furious that they had been kept in the dark about everything. Since our work there was done, Aunt Sophia led me out of the venue before things could turn nasty. Since the wedding, I swear I have felt such an overwhelming sense of relief, like a huge weight has been lifted off my chest. Finally, the truth is out in the open. My dad, who has tried so hard to hide his actions, will now forever be branded as a terrible parent. Update 3. Dad and Dee Dee did try to reach out to me and Aunt Sophia after the wedding, probably due to the public criticism they faced, but we ignored them just as they have been ignoring me all these months. Later, Dad sent me a text saying that Dee Dee was furious and that I shouldn't have humiliated them on their special day. He claims he is ready to forgive me if I come back home and apologize to Dee Dee. He even said he would allow me to move back in and that things could go back to normal. I replied that I was done with him this time. I told him that he and Dee Dee deserve each other since they are both so terrible. I made it clear that I was never going back to him. I am going to be 18 soon and I know my aunt has my back. I'm also determined to work hard all my life and ensure that I never have to ask my dad for a penny. No amount of apology from him can ever fix what he has broken.